This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports. This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
And welcome to the Start Spreading the News Yankee Show. I am your co-host, Paul Semendinger, and I am the editor-in-chief of the Start Spreading the News Yankee blog. And today I am joined with my two co-hosts, the wonderful EJ Fagan and the equally wonderful Andy Singer. Hey guys, how are you both doing today?
Doing wonderful, Paul.
Yeah. And EJ, do you have us? Can you confirm that we're live?
We are live. Yes.
Awesome. So we are doing exactly what we are supposed to do, and everything is working. Today, I am the executive producer, director, and whatever else title you would like to give me. So I'm going to be really behind the scenes today. We have a lot of talking today about Derek Jeter's series on ESPN, The Captain. But we are going to begin today with talk where EJ and Andy are really the experts. And of course, that has to do with the minor leagues and the baseball draft. Since I'm executive producing this thing and I've never done it before, I'm going to go into the background and we're going to let Andy and EJ discuss the Yankees draft from last week.
All right, Andy, we got 20 new friends. The Yankees did their draft. I think we both have some big picture thoughts. You know these individual players better than I do. But let me just start off with you. The Yankees drafted 20 new players. What did you think of their overall draft? Was it a good draft? What was their strategy? You know, what did the Yankees add that they didn't have in the organization previously?
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting draft for the Yankees, and I thought, number one, I think it was obvious that their board looked very different from, I think, a lot of the publicly available boards, particularly in the top.
As they tend to.
Yeah,
the Yankee board tends to be a little odd.
Yeah, and I think the Yankees are one of the teams that still blend statistical modeling with traditional scouting, and that puts up some really strange boards or at least boards that outwardly appear strange when you consider the fact that most teams operate in one vertical or the other. And I think the Yankees blend those two disciplines in a really interesting way. What I think was at a high level, I think what's really interesting to note is that the Yankees were super pitching heavy in this draft. I would say that it wasn't intentional and it was really just picking the best player available, but I'm not sure that's all that was going on there. As many fans will note and realize, because we've talked about it a lot, it starts spreading the news. Coming up after this season, the Yankees have another 40-man roster crunch coming. A bunch of pitchers will be available for the Rule 5 draft if they're not protected. So I think the Yankees were hedging their bets a little bit by ensuring that they had some depth arms, guys who were interesting to them from a skills perspective, but who also could fill in some gaps in the organization when they inevitably lose some pitchers after this season. So I think the Yankees went pitching heavy. They've also proven that they're really, really good at developing pitching in the last couple of years. That went from being a weakness to a significant strength. It seems like every guy that comes into the Yankee minor league system adds at least half a grade to a full grade in fastball velocity. They add the whirly slider, among other things, but they are also really good at developing changeups, which is pretty good for developing starters. So I'm really interested to see what the Yankees do, and they're leaning into their strengths from a development staff perspective. And overall, I thought it was a good draft for the team, even if it didn't necessarily match other publicly available big boards.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the Yankees didn't Yankee this one up, which is saying something for the draft, because they are not good at drafting in the early rounds. You mentioned them being good at pitching, and I'm going to qualify this saying in recent years I think they're better. But you mentioned pitching, and they get a lot of pitching out of like the 6th through 9th rounds. That's where they're good. That's where they got Ken Waldachuk, who's their top pitching prospect right now. It's where they got Hayden Wesneski, who's at AAA. We're going to see soon. I think that's where JP Sears came out of. Big, tall college guys that they can add 7 miles per hour to their fastball. That's the Yankee MO in the draft. And then they draft just awful pitchers high up in the draft, right? They draft Matt Sauer, who's barely made it out of low A. They draft TJ Sikkema, who's been injured since basically the day they drafted him. We go on and on. What they've improved on, I think, is they've stopped going for weirdo hitters. Or rather, they stopped going for low ceiling weirdo hitters. They're still going for weirdo hitters, right? I mean, Spencer Jones, look, he's Aaron Judge, right? They're like, hey, wouldn't it be nice to have another guy named Aaron Judge, who's not Aaron Judge, but he's 6'7" and huge, and fast and athletic and all of that, and unrefined and may or may not kind of turn into anything. And I think that's better than what they used to do, which is draft. We've talked about Cito Culver, right? And there's a lot of kind of players in that world where they drafted kind of weird. Now, the one exception to that actually worked out was Anthony Volpe, who was an overdraft, was not on other people's boards, was a cold weather guy, local guy. He was from New Jersey, Del Barton High School. And, he, like a lot of those other guys that the Yankees drafted, had, really high makeup grades. The Yankees love their makeup, right? They prefer mental tools over physical tools. And in a physical sport, I'm not really sure that's the best idea in the world, but sometimes it does work out. And I think in more recent years, we've seen Trey Sweeney as I think a pretty solid late first round draft pick. We've seen the Yankees, I think, get a little bit better at this. But this is not a team that excels at the draft. I mean, if you just look at the team right now, the Major League Baseball team, there's Aaron Judge, and there's no one else. They haven't pulled up, I think, anyone else of note out of the draft, at least out of the high rounds of the draft on their team. Gary Sanchez was an international free agent signing, so you can kind of put him kind of in that same kind of top prospect route. But they're great at taking guys who have a little bit of talent and a lot of good makeup and a lot of experience at the college level, and then they turn them into gold, and that's what they do. If they can do both, then they're the Dodgers, right? They're a team that's constantly developing players. I don't know yet if they can, but I think this is a good thing. I'm going to sneeze. I apologize. I think the bottom line here is that this is a conventional draft in a lot of ways. I mean, Spencer Jones is a pretty conventional first round pick. Some of the lower guys, I think they were a little above their projected pick, but I'm just happy that they kind of just took a dart and threw it at somebody in the Baseball America top 30 with their 28th overall pick or whatever it was.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll definitely talk about Spencer Jones in a second. But I agree with you. It's definitely more conventional than previous Yankee drafts, or at least the Yankee drafts that happened when you and I came up beginning to look at prospects. I think back to some truly terrible drafts. But it's funny that we talk about Aaron Judge in the same breath as we talk about a guy like Spencer Jones, because at least when I think about the recent history of Yankee drafts, that Aaron Judge draft class is probably the first draft class that I remember actively saying, you know what, I like this draft class. I like what the Yankees did. I think that they finally did something that they went conventional with, like the Eric Aiello pick, but then they drafted for ceiling with Aaron Judge, and there wasn't a signability issue with any of these guys. They picked guys that they knew would come to the Yankee farm system. So, and that's about around the same time that we started to see some of these draft picks convert into either usable major league talent or talent that could be used as leverage in a trade of some kind. And the Yankees hadn't been good at doing that for years. So,
and the difference between Spencer Jones and even like Trey Sweeney, I forget where Austin Wells went to school. So he's a Vanderbilt guy, right? Mm-hmm. Big college program, very well polished. Aaron Judge was, I forget where Aaron Judge was. He's
Fresno State.
So not as big of a program, but still not Eastern Illinois University.
Right, exactly, and Austin Wells as well was a big West Coast school, University of Arizona. Yeah. So they are drafting from bigger schools. However, the Yankees have proven that they, in recent years, at least in the last couple of years, that they're doing better at going small school. So before we get to some of those small school talents, we should talk about Spencer Jones, and I'll start with this. We're going to start with the good of the Yankee draft. We've said a lot of nice things about the Yankees so far. I will give a couple of picks that I didn't love quite as much. However, we'll start with the good. And Spencer Jones, I think, was a very good first-round draft pick for the Yankees. Spencer Jones, depending on which list you like the best, Spencer Jones rated anywhere from 25 to about 65, depending on the list you were looking at, which means this was probably a pretty good draft pick at the end of the first round. I think Spencer Jones is a guy who has more upside than a lot of the other picks that the Yankees could have made in this spot. So for those uninitiated, Spencer Jones is a 6'7", very athletic outfielder. I think the Aaron Judge comparisons have been very, very overblown just because he's 6'7" and he has a ton of raw power. So Spencer Jones recorded the highest exit velocities in Division I college baseball last season. But unlike Aaron Judge, he was not a multi-year starter. Prior to last season, he had been a two-way player. However, he had Tommy John surgery and much of his arm strength has been sapped, really. He grades out below average with the arm, although some scouts say at the end of the season he was finally starting to uncork it a little bit again from the outfield. So maybe there's above average arm strength in there if it comes back a little bit. The other thing that's important to note, Spencer Jones is nowhere near as polished a player as Aaron Judge was, which is kind of surprising to say because Aaron Judge was largely considered a project when he came out of school. So Spencer Jones
does not, right? That's the difference. Yeah.
Yeah. So Spencer Jones does not project to have even an average hit tool. He has an idea of the strike zone, but he's got a large strike zone to manage. And Aaron Judge had a very short swing that produced power, still produces power to this day. And he really doesn't extend his arms all that much, which is why he's able to cover so much area within the strike zone. Spencer Jones has a longer swing. He's not as big physically as Aaron Judge, so the hands don't get through the zone quite the same way. So I think it's really dangerous to compare the two, and I don't think it's fair to Spencer Jones to make that comparison at this time. However, what Spencer Jones does have, he's built a little more, I would say he's more like a wide receiver than he is like a tight end in terms of build. So Spencer Jones is somebody who I think legitimately is going to start out in center field in the Yankee system. He runs very, very well underway. He's more athletic than Aaron Judge at the same age. So I think he's got a shot to stick in center field. He also shows some very decent base running ability, something that not a lot of the networks have talked up very much, but he's a good base runner. And there's a lot of room to grow here because he just didn't play a lot because of injury. So Tommy John surgery really took out a lot of playing time at the Division I level for Spencer Jones, and he kind of exploded onto the scene this year because he does have so much raw talent, and that raw talent got him through in SEC competition, which is probably pretty close to the level of low A on the right day. So he's a guy who has tools. I think the Yankees know how to manage big players. So they're used to it with Giancarlo Stanton, Aaron Judge, and numerous others. So they've proven that they can develop that type of player. And I think what you're going to see is that the Yankees are going to try to shorten up his swing a little bit. And if everything clicks right and he can hit enough to tap into the raw power, you do have 70 grade power, raw power from the left side, which fits Yankee Stadium beautifully. So Spencer Jones is a good first round pick, even if it doesn't hit. I think you take this risk every time at the end of the first round if you're the Yankees.
And let me add one thing. He's a lefty.
Yep.
And the Yankees have now drafted lefty power hitters 3 years in a row. I think it's clear we've talked about this for years, how this is a strangely right-handed Yankees team. They're trying to develop a lefty power hitter or multiple lefty power hitters to put onto the team. And, I think this kind of follows that trend. So imagine if Aaron Judge was a lefty. I get that the Aaron Judge comparisons aren't right, but he sure would look good as a lefty. Then you get even more home runs. I think the other thing you see a lot with the Yankees recently is size. Not just Spencer Jones being abnormally large, but if you look down the list of heights that they drafted a lot of guys who are 6'2" to 6'4". That's not every player in the draft, right? I mean, there's lots of players in the draft that are smaller than that to get drafted. And the Yankees in recent years just don't want anything to do with them. They've always been a big team. They've been a big team recently. You have to go back to basically Volpe to find somebody who's like a normal-sized human being that they've drafted. It's an interesting strategy. The Yankees, especially with pitchers, they just have a reputation for everybody being 6'4". And, that's probably a good thing for pitchers. They feel like they can kind of take those raw materials and turn them into much better players. But if you want to be a future Yankee kids, I'd recommend growing 3 or 4 inches because that would be that's what seems to get their attention.
Yeah, for sure. I know I would have liked to have been an extra, 4 or 5 inches taller
Also,
when I pitched.
as someone who is 6'4" and not an athlete, it's not great. It's hard to buy jeans. So I recommend being careful there.
EJ, I've got to jump in here. Just a question. You're 6'4"?
Yes.
I never knew that.
We haven't met in person. I'll tell you. So I was hired. I'm a professor. I was hired in my first year. We were teaching on Zoom for a year. So I never saw my colleagues. I saw them for one day when I was interviewed. That was it. No one else saw me for a year and a half after that. And I met all of them at the end of the academic year. This was like May of 2021 for a little barbecue. And they were shocked. They're like, oh my God, I had no idea you were, a giant human being. But also not athletes. So probably be a pretty bad pitcher. Yankees, please don't draft me.
Yeah, but the funny thing is when we're on these programs, the Bronx Beat podcast, obviously we do that just audio, and I don't see you. And then when we're on this show, we're the same size. Always, we have the same height, the same type of headroom on the show. So I'll give you a quick story. Growing up, I knew I would never be tall. I'm about 5'8" or 5'9", maybe 5'8.5". Right? We'll give me a little bonus there. I knew I'd never be tall, and reading the back of baseball cards, which is what I did all the time, I knew that Ron Guidry and Thurman Munson were both 5'11", and that was my dream. I hope I can be 5'11". I didn't make it, but I knew I wouldn't be 6 foot, but I was hoping one day to be 5'11". So far, just a quick question. Are you guys feeling like the production's going well?
It's going great.
Yeah,
awesome.
Great job.
Awesome. I'm going to bow out again and let you guys continue with the draft talk.
Yeah, so let's talk about second round pick. Drew Thorpe. Is he one of the ones you don't like?
Nope. He's actually my favorite pick in the entire draft.
Wow, there we go.
I actually think that most of the public rankings are wrong about Drew Thorpe. I think they were far too underwhelming, and I think Drew Thorpe is the exact type of pitcher the Yankees should pick every single time. And I wouldn't have even been upset with it if the Yankees had decided to pick him in the first round. And I'll tell you why. So Drew Thorpe, let me tell you who he is right now. Drew Thorpe sits 88 to 92 miles per hour with his fastball. He's a right-handed pitcher, not an oversized guy. I believe he's 6'2". He's got a solid curveball slider combination, kind of slurvy sometimes, but he's got one real put away pitch, and that's a 60 plus grade changeup, and it flashes even better than 60. He's got room in his delivery though for more fastball velocity. And if my amateur eye can see that he's not finishing over his front side on pitches, I'm sure the Yankees see that and a heck of a lot more. So if they can take Drew Thorpe from throwing 88 to 92, which we've heard over and over again with guys that the Yankees pick up, that this righty sits 88 to 92, and he'd be a much better prospect if he was 91 to 94. That's about one grade higher in fastball. Drew Thorpe's probably about a 45 on the 20/80 scale in his fastball right now. If he's a 55 fastball, that changeup bumps up to a 65-70 grade changeup, and now he's got a verified put away pitch with a solid average curve or slider. I think he'll probably pick one of those in pro ball. But with that kind of arsenal, this is a guy who can be at the very least, a mid-rotation starter. And that's really valuable. And if you get that out of the second round of the draft, you had a fantastic draft. So I love Drew Thorpe. I think he's already a solid pick if this is all he is. And I think he's got a shot to be a back-end rotation arm. Again, a really good outcome for second round. But I think there's a lot of room there for more. He's also, if you look at his body, he's got room to add a little bit of muscle, particularly in his lower half. So I think there's some mechanical approaches the Yankees can work with that are readily apparent now. And I'm sure that their array of pitching coaches are going to work with him to get a lot more than I ever could out of him. So I love the Drew Thorpe pick.
Let me add up, just reading his scouting report, which is all I'm going on, basically mentions that he can spin a fastball. Which is good news. He's got run on his fastball. So if he adds some miles to that, then all of a sudden that becomes a very deadly pitch. But I haven't seen him in person, but you have seen someone in person. The third round pick.
Yep, the third round pick, Tristan Vreeling, and I got to see him on the Cape last year. He pitched against the. I go to see the Orleans Firebirds every year, except this one, as I wait for my first child to arrive. But I try to get to as many Cape League games as I can in the 1 and change weeks I spend there in a summer. And I got to see Tristan Vreeling last year. He shut out the Orleans Firebirds. I believe it was a shutout in the appearance that I saw him. At that appearance, he sat 90 to 92, according to the gun at Eldridge Park that night, if that can be believed. But it looked pretty close to my eye. So 90 to 92, and he was peaking at about 94, 95 when he wanted to reach back for a little extra. So the arm works. He's got a full arsenal of pitches that if you can squint and you can see a major league starting pitcher there. What I have a lot of concerns about, as good as he was against the Orleans Firebirds last year, who did have first round draft picks in their lineup. Chase DeWater was anchoring the middle of that lineup. So I got to see him hit against Tristan Vreeling. He went in the middle of the first round this year. Vreeling really struggled with his control in the second half of this year, and there's a really good reason why. The end of his delivery is very violent, and his head moves around a lot, which is something scouts typically don't like, and his arm recoils really hard off the end, which means he's spinning off and really pushing down with the front of his elbow at the end of his delivery. So I really worry about him being able to start long term, and I'm not sure the stuff plays up enough out of the bullpen to be anything more than a potential middle reliever. So I think he needs a lot of mechanical work, and it's not just about, well, he needs more stuff, he needs to grade up. I very much worry about not just the ability to command his fastball. I worry about the ability to control his stuff consistently. And it's not like Luis Medina, who throws an easy 100 miles per hour with plus secondary stuff. A guy like that can get by with barely fringe control and some nascent fastball command. A guy like that can be a major league pitcher.
Let me interrupt you. I mean, he's a third round pick.
Yep.
Right.
He is a third round pick.
You want someone who has ability and, some ceiling. And it sounds like he has ceiling if the Yankees can overhaul his mechanics.
And typically, I agree with you. I think there were a couple of other, and of course, the names escape me at the moment. When I saw the pick, there were a couple of other pitchers available who I think fit in a similar mold, who had cleaner delivery, so I think would have been of interest to the Yankees. I think it's likely that they were looking at signability here in round 3, which is one of the factors about the MLB draft that you don't have in, say, football or basketball or hockey for that matter to worry about. Signability in the third round is a very big thing. So you might see a pitcher who is of interest to you, but could easily go back to school.
And they've already spent a little bit of extra money on, I think, one of their 12th round picks or something like that who they've signed. And so if they want to steal a little bit of money from their third round pick, that's the way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. I think Tristan Vreeling's a guy who might go under slot if he hasn't signed already. I think Spencer Jones might go a little under slot just because a lot of the scouting services had him as Oh, did he?
Yeah, I'll get the actual numbers so we can see if he went at slot. Spencer Jones seems like a guy who's going to sign at slot.
Yeah, I think he might give a little discount, but we'll see what happens there. But in any case, Vreeling has upside. He has ceiling if he can put it all together and if he can clean up his delivery. There's an interesting pitcher there. I'm just not sure he's going to get to it.
He was exactly slot value, by the way. He signed for today.
Okay, proven wrong then. But after Vreeling, there are a couple of other. I think there's something else important to note there. That the Yankees in the middle rounds did pick a couple of relievers who I think are going to be relatively fast moving. And that's where I kind of want to focus next. In the 5th and 9th rounds, the Yankees picked a couple of relief pitchers. Those who have been following the Yankee minor league draft for years now will remember that the Yankees a few years ago, it's probably more than a few years ago at this point, when they picked Josh, I believe his name was Josh Lindgren, who was a relief pitcher in the first round, was supposed to go
be on the team in time for the playoffs. He's got the slider that make him a guaranteed major leaguer.
And it turned out that he was an 89 to 91 mile per hour fastball with a slider that was really good, but he had no idea where it was going. And the Yankees put all of their eggs into that basket, and it failed miserably, unfortunately. So the Yankees aren't doing things like that anymore, luckily, but they picked a couple of really interesting relievers who I do think can move quickly through the minor league system. So in round 5, they picked a pitcher by the name of Eric Rizzelman, and he's got a huge fastball and a slider that he learned on the Cape. He's another guy that I got to see in person, and I don't remember seeing the slider. What I remember is hearing the fastball in the bullpen, and I said, I need to walk over there and see who's there, because you could hear it from where I sat in the outfield. So I walked over to the bullpen, and I played at a high enough level that I've seen mid-90s fastballs with some regularity, and this guy throws in the high 90s with relative ease. It's a high effort delivery once he's out on the mound. I think control might be somewhat of a problem, but the guy throws really hard, and if he's already getting some feel for a slider, I got to imagine that the Yankees with the whirly slider are going to be able to find some interesting things. Desi Drusel, as the pitch design guy, is going to find some way to work with this guy in the offseason to make that pitch viable. So I think he's somebody who could move very quickly just given his velocity and spin profile. The other guy that the Yankees drafted who I think could be a quick mover, which is rare for this late in the draft, in round 9, the Yankees picked Matt Keating out of USC. Like Spencer Jones, he doesn't have a ton of experience pitching at the Division I level. In fact, this was his first full season pitching, as he had been a two-way player previously, and he played against some good competition out at USC this season. He's got a low to mid-90s fastball with good mechanics. He's got an athletic build, but the big thing is he's got an absolutely knockout curveball with that's been measured at around 2,600 spin, which is elite at the major league level. But most importantly, he's really, really good at tunneling it with his fastball, and it's really sharp and comes in hard and dives suddenly. It's a classic with 12-6 without the hump, as they say. So he's a guy who could move very quickly, and particularly since appears to be very coachable and he's very athletic. So he's a guy that I think is worth watching, and I thought it was interesting that the Yankees used two picks on pitchers that might be ready within the relatively quickly, particularly when you compare it to a starter's workload. The last thing that I wanted to mention, the Yankees didn't go all pitcher with their draft. They did pick a couple of position players in rounds 4 and rounds 8. In round 4, they picked Anthony Hall, who flashes raw power that's better than average, but it's mostly a set of average tools, and he's the first guy in this draft that you could say that the Yankees went high floor, low ceiling. And I think there's a high probability that Anthony Hall, who plays a really good corner outfield defensively, he does a lot of things decently. I think in a few years, if he's a very good fourth outfielder, it wouldn't surprise me. He played against good competition, some feel to hit, some raw power, and he's a decent pick in the 4th round. The guy that I think might be more interesting is the 8th round draft pick, Brett Barrera out of Stanford, who he was announced as a shortstop, which is kind of surprising because I don't think he ever actually played shortstop last year at Stanford, and he's a pretty terrible defender everywhere he's been. So I can't imagine that he's going to move up the defensive spectrum to shortstop. So he's kind of a positionless player, but he's got a ton of pop from the right side, and he's an average athlete. So if they can find a position to hide him at other than first base, I think he's got an interesting enough bat that maybe he surprises some people.
And played second base in college. So I wouldn't be shocked if that's kind of his future there. But let's move on. We've talked about the draft for half an hour. I think that's about enough of the draft for people. If you want any more, go to Start Spreading the News, the baseball blog. I'm sure Andy is going to write about a lot of these players, at least until he has a lot more busy life coming up soon. So, Paul, let's get you back in here. Let's talk about the next topic.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, EJ, and thank you, Andy. That was illuminating. I don't really follow the draft. Ethan, one of our writers, did a great job doing some profiles of some of the players. I read those, but I don't really follow the draft. So, it's one of the great things about doing a blog and a podcast is we get to learn from each other. And you guys, I just learned a ton from both of you. So the next topic, and let's see if I can make this work seamlessly, because if we can, this will be really cool. The next topic, which I can't make work seamlessly because I lost the picture. Here it is. So here we go. is we are going to talk about The Captain, the TV show on ESPN. The first 2 episodes have already been shown. This is the sign, I believe, that was near Fenway Park, but I could be wrong. A lot of people made a big deal about the fact that the Captain sign was outside of Fenway Park, but I don't think that was a big deal at all. I just think ESPN's advertising a great show. And
I'm just saying, when the David Ortiz documentary happens, revenge is coming. So
yes,
so let's not be too happy about it.
Correct. And you know what? If they put a big David Ortiz banner outside Yankee Stadium for an ESPN show, I get it. It's all good. So I'll just start and say I've greatly enjoyed it so far. I think it's been quite interesting. I love the family aspect. Everybody always said how much of a family person Derek Jeter was and how involved his parents and his sister were in his life. And boy, does that shine through, at least to me, over those first 2 episodes. You see this good family supporting each other and helping a young kid fulfill his lifetime dream. And so I've loved that aspect.
I want to note that Derek Jeter's father has a PhD in social sciences, sociology. So, another one for us. Go, raise your, if you marry a social scientist because they'll raise your kids good.
There you go. So what do you guys think?
I'm really enjoying it. I think it's a beautifully made documentary. I'm excited for the next 5 episodes in a big way. The first episode we saw aside of Derek Jeter, you hear some stories about, but you don't really kind of see depicted this way. Him as a kid, him as a minor leaguer, him kind of as born this incredibly competitive person, you could tell. And that's why he becomes as good as he was out of Michigan. You see those little bits of his personality that you haven't seen before. I mean, he's cursed. I've never seen Derek Jeter curse before, and he did it on camera. It was a little jarring. It was just kind of over nothing. There's a little bit of that Michael Jordan personality there. The competitor, you can see it in him, and you can see that he's not afraid to be that guy. I think he's more sane than Jordan. Michael Jordan in The Last Dance comes off as just an absolute crazy person. I mean, in a way that wins a lot of ball games. But you got the sense from Michael Jordan that his teammates didn't like him. They liked playing with him. They liked him. They liked winning games and they respected him. They didn't like him as a person. And I get the sense that Derek Jeter, his teammates like him a lot as a person, and that isn't at least so far. We've seen that. But I think at least the second episode, it's hurt a little bit as a Yankee fan by the fact that I've heard all these stories before. Right? I know who the 96, 98 Yankees were. I've seen them play a lot. I've seen the. I mean, I was there in 1998. They showed Tino Martinez's grand slam in Game 1. I was in the stadium for that. That was the day I kind of became a big baseball fan. But I've heard those stories retold a lot, and I'm excited for the stories I haven't heard. All the stuff that happens in between the World Series runs and the end of his career. I'm very excited for that. I'm excited for next episode. It's going to be about him and A-Rod. I'll read a tweet in a second that I sent that was, I think, confirmed by Randy Wilkins, who directed and produced the show. But first, I'll let Andy get in.
Yeah, no, I was a huge Derek Jeter fan. I mean, I'm the stereotypical Yankee fan from the mid '90s. I sort of came of age with baseball as Derek Jeter was a rookie, and I love watching this. I mean, the part that stick with me, and I'd be lying if I didn't say that my eyes got glossy, was watching the home video of Derek Jeter in his living room after he found out that he was drafted by the Yankees. And he says, I didn't even know the Yankees picked 6 because my agent said I was going 1 or 5. So I didn't know that they picked 6. And his mother yelling, it's your dream. It's the Yankees. It's the Yankees. I thought that was as cool as it gets. Now, like EJ said, as Yankee fans, yeah, we know it all. We know it all. We've known it all. But you know what? I haven't watched any of the 96, 98 highlights in a long time. So it's been really fun for me to relive that because we haven't seen a championship in a while. So
it beats losing, right? I mean, we're going to be reliving 2004 in a few episodes, right? So let's watch these.
Yeah, we're going to watch all of the scenes that caused guys like EJ and I to start reading Bill James and some of the other things that became popular around that time because we said there had to be a better way. But I think it's really funny, EJ, that you mentioned that all of his teammates seem to like him. And I'm really curious to find out whether that's the case when we get to those mid 2000s teams, because there were a lot of whispers about the fact that, Derek Jeter, even though he was named the captain, really wasn't a great captain during that time. And I want to know if that's true. I want to know what Derek Jeter's perspective about the way in which he led on the New York Yankees. I want to know how other players felt about him. I'm fascinated to find out what some of the real story is between A-Rod and Derek Jeter, because I think the seeds were laid in episode 2 for what's coming. And I can't wait, because I think there was so much talent other than the pitching staff on some of those mid 2000s teams. I still find it hard to believe that the Derek Jeter, Alex Rodriguez Yankees didn't come away with a championship sometime between 2005 and 2006. I think those teams were on the cusp of being good enough to get to the World Series, but something was very, other than pitching.
Yeah, their defense. That was the problem. They had no defense on those teams. Those teams were awful.
Minor detail. Nobody cares about defense.
I think I think what's interesting is, we're watching the 90s Derek Jeter. He's the star of the team, public face of the team, no doubt, right? Fresh young face. Every girl wants to be with him. I mean, I remember my little sister being in love with Derek Jeter at the time. Like, I think a lot of girls and some boys were, right? That was common in New York at that period of time. But on the team, even though he seems like a vocal out there, he's definitely a player beyond his age on the team. David Cohen and David Wells and Bernie Williams, who is much older, et cetera. They're not listening to Derek Jeter, right? Derek Jeter they maybe treated them like an equal, but he wasn't the leader of those guys. And by the mid 2000s, he's the leader. Right, Robinson Cano comes up, and he's got to deal with Derek Jeter. A-Rod comes to the team, and he's coming into Derek Jeter's house. And then Bernie Williams starts to fade away, and Jorge Posada starts to fade away. Andy Pettitte goes to Houston, etc. That's a very different environment for him. So I think you're right. I'm very curious to hear that, and maybe those guys like him less. David Cohen certainly likes him. And it's fun to kind of watch them kind of all be like, hey, wow, this guy's mature beyond his years. But I wonder if that starts to grate on him. One problem with these documentaries, and I don't think this documentary will suffer from that, at least the other ones didn't, is they're done with the cooperation of the subject. It's got to be hard as a journalist to do that. I mean, Paul, you tell me, you're writing a book about a baseball player. I mean, do you feel the ability to be critical about Roy White?
That's a great question. Now, I'm writing Roy White's autobiography.
Okay.
So there's nothing in there for me to be critical about, because I'm really writing his story with him. The book is going to be by Roy White with Paul Semendinger. So what you're talking is something totally different than the project that I'm currently working on. So what is interesting, though, is what you are saying. Let's say you're the editor or the producer of this series, and let's say there's a player who says something extremely critical of Derek Jeter. And Derek Jeter, being a big part of the production, says he doesn't want that on the air. How does that work? Do you guys have any behind-the-scene knowledge of that? Does Derek Jeter have the right to refuse anything that would be part of the show?
I'd love to have Randy on one of our shows to discuss this exact question. ESPN has always been, I think, a pretty good journalistic outlet. That they're not afraid to criticize sports. They're not afraid to kind of break some of the bad news in the way that, for example, like a beat writer, very often they're captive, right? They forget the beat writer. Think about the Yes Network crew, right? They can't be that critical. They can be a little bit critical when somebody flubs a ground ball. They can say he should have had that. But because they're stuck there, right? Because they have to deal with these people day in and day out, they are just not very critical. They're very positive. That's sometimes, I think, to the detriment of just kind of sports journalism
of the program. Did you watch the game yesterday? Just taking a quick tangent.
Yes, I did.
All right. So there was a base hit to right field. Gleyber Torres was on first base, and anybody watching, you tell me if I read this differently, watched a guy who really just jogged slowly to second base, and then all of a sudden finds out he could go to third, and he tries to turn it up. And the coverage, the announcing of that play on the Yes Network was, he's trying to deke the right fielder. Now, listen, we've all watched baseball a million times. I don't ever know of a guy who's trying to deke the right field or on a base hit to right field. You're running hard, and you're either going to be told to stop at second or go to third. But how is the fielder being deked? If you're playing right field, to throw us to third base. I don't get it.
So this is going to sound conspiratorial to some extent, and that's really not what I'm trying to do here. I think that they were very inartfully trying to cover up the fact that Glaber is nursing an ankle injury that the Yankees really don't want to talk about. Glaber had a cortisone shot on that ankle. Cameron Maben is really tight with all the guys in that clubhouse. He knows a lot of them still. And I think they were avoiding saying that he was babying the ankle and realized, well, it feels okay enough to round the corner and run hard. So I don't think he came out of the box hard, saw that he could get to third and busted it out of the box, but busted it out of second base, really, and it just wasn't enough. But I agree with you. It sounded incredibly homerish and ridiculous, even to diehards like us.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay, so
it sounded like
Jeter.
Yeah, I thought that they were giving Glaber Torres like an excuse, like, hey, in your clubhouse interview, say this.
Right, that's what I felt.
Yeah, just because you don't want to open that can of worms of is he running that hard. I like Andy's theory better, and frankly, like I mean, it's not like this isn't hockey where you don't tell people where the injury is because otherwise people will jam a stick into it. It's baseball. It's not like someone's gonna like hit him in the ankle. Just tell people. I don't know. So the captain. So next episode is going to focus on his relation with A-Rod. So Randy Wilkins, who is both the producer and director of the show, big Yankee fan, big Yankee Twitter guy, wrote for Views from 314 a little bit. Who I interact with on Twitter every once in a while, and I haven't met him otherwise. Said, quote, I hope you all enjoyed the second episode of The Captain. We'll be back next Thursday with episode 3 premiering at 9 p.m. Eastern. We dig into Derek's relationship with a certain guy who played in Seattle. I hope you're ready. And we had some story of this in episode 2. They had this magazine cover, and there's a magazine cover is like in a very strangely like late 90s way has a Derek Jeter like in like a headlock, or no, putting A-Rod into a headlock. And the idea was that these were the kind of the two young hot shortstops, and eventually Nomar Garcia-Parra does like an album cover with them too. And A-Rod took offense to that and said, I'm never doing another thing with Derek Jeter because I'm better. I'm not the guy in the headlock. I'm the guy who puts him in the headlock. Now there's a little bit of a I don't know, whatever, mob mentality here where the mafia is slighted and always wants to be kind of the bigger person. Jeter was the bigger star. A-Rod was no doubt the better player. But now we're gonna get into that, and it's gonna be interesting. And when Wilkins asked A-Rod about did you say this, he completely denied it, which we know is wrong, right? And I like that little bit of journalism right there. He's digging a little bit, and so I came up with my prediction for episode 3. My prediction was we have a scene. A-Rod speaks, having asked him a question about Derek Jeter, and he says, we're great friends. We've had a rocky relationship at times, but I consider him my best of friends. Typical Alex Rodriguez, being diplomatic, being fake. That's who A-Rod is, right? We all know this. Then we cut to Derek Jeter, and Derek Jeter says, I effing hate that guy. And then we cut to Alex Rodriguez watching Derek Jeter say that on an iPad. Right, that's the scenario I've been wanting for a year now. Right, the only other thing I would like to add in there is to be like, oh, and by the way, I slept with J-Lo. Right, like that's the only other thing that could make that scene better. Randy replies, and he has since deleted this tweet, which might tell you something about the tweet. Quote: "We don't have any iPads here." So I think we might be getting something on this episode 3 right here, and I've been predicting it for a year. So I want to see this kind of conversation from afar on camera between the two of them.
Well, and EJ, that would be groundbreaking. Now it would be great if you could get him on our program. That would be something we ought to reach out and
ask. I think he's doing a lot of media right now. My plan is after it's all died down, call him and be like, hey, let's talk some Yankee stuff, not general media. Let's do this from the perspective of some kind of hardcore nerdy Yankee fans.
Yes. And, as you say, he did work for Views from 314, so he understands the plight of the blog and what we're trying to do and the podcast, and not just major media and things like that. Hey, let me ask this question. I'm going to give you my answer after I ask the question. Then and you guys already know this because we talked about it offline already. But I want to know if you guys have a favorite line so far. My favorite line was Derek Jeter talking about the Jeffrey Mayer home run. And he says something along the lines of, well, we all know the truth. And I'm thinking, I can't believe it. He's going to admit that his home run wasn't really a home run and that the kid stole it. And speaking of great games, I was there for that one. And then he pauses and he said, well, Tarasco should have jumped. I loved it. It broke me up. It was so perfect. It was so Derek Jeter, and it was so pro Yankee and everything. I just said, that is awesome. That was my favorite moment so far. Though I will say Andy's take on Jeter when he got drafted was just priceless. Watching him, and you can see like he's overwhelmed with, he didn't even know what to do. He just sort of stood there because it was all sinking in. So that too is a phenomenal scene. How about you guys? Any special favorite quotes?
I like when he cursed, right? Said the FRU, right? I mean, it was that moment of dare. I think Randy, I'll ask him about this. Very intentionally put that in the first 20 minutes, right? Just to say like, hey, this is going to be Derek Jeter. This is not going to be Derek Jeter talking to beat reporters after a game. This is going to be the real personality of the real guy. And I think we just saw a preview, and I think it's going to get even better as we talk about maybe some people he doesn't like that much.
Yeah. Other than the getting drafted, I think the one I liked was him talking about making 56 errors down in rookie ball in his first season. He goes, man, 56 errors. You got to try to do that. You got to really try. It was like a guy being self-deprecating on your bench after he makes another error and he knows everybody's staring at him. He's like, man, you got to try to do that.
Great stuff. Other thoughts about the captain? So
I have the outline of where we're going. I'm going to actually bring it up real quick. So there's 7 episodes total. Originally, there were scheduled to be 6. The 7th was added after Derek Jeter left Miami. And according to, I heard Randy on another podcast say that they had a heads up that this was going to happen before it happened. And so in that 7th episode, I think they had cameras on him when it happened.
Oh,
I wouldn't be shocked if they had cameras on him when it happened, right? Because they knew it was going to happen. And they had a heads up before the news broke, before he left. And I mean, I would have cameras on him if I knew that was going to happen, or at least on him as soon as it happens, right afterwards. So I'm very excited to see that. Let me read you guys the what's coming up, and you guys tell me what you think is interesting here. So episode 3 is going to focus on the importance of loyalty and trust to Jeter as the Yankees cap off a three-peat against the Mets, and his friendship with Alex Rodriguez has changed. So we're going to get a lot of A-Rod stuff. We're going to get 99. We're going to get his contract. We're going to get 2000. And then episode 4, an episode I'm very excited for, the 2001 World Series. The 9/11's impact on New York. I think that was going to be an amazing set of games to watch, especially for people who aren't familiar with it. And then the blood feud with the Red Sox, the early 2000s, maybe the best rivalry in sports. That's going to end with Aaron Boone's home run. Episode 5 is the Doldrums. It's going to start off with a 2004 World ALCS, and then kind of go through the 2000s. Episode 6, he wins his 5th and final World Series. He slowly leaves the game. He gets injured. He gets his 3,000th hit, etc. He meets his wife. All that kind of stuff is going to happen then. And then again, 7 after the Marlins. So what are you guys excited for in this group?
Yeah, I think I'm fascinated to know what happened with the Marlins, just because there's so many vestiges of that era in Derek Jeter's life that are still there. I mean, Derek Jeter brought in Gary Denbo as the VP of player development with the Marlins. I mean, Derek Jeter's fingerprints are all over that organization right now. So I'm fascinated to know what happened there, because that seemed to, at least to outwardly, it seemed to come out of nowhere. So I'm fascinated for that. I'm also, I really want to know, I want a very real perspective of what it was like for Derek Jeter and the Yankees in 2001. I don't think that intimate side of it has really been told. We know what it looked like from a public, outwardly facing media perspective. We all lived it living in the tri-state area at that time. So I'm fascinated to know what that was like. As a sidebar, it's interesting to me just because a couple of weeks after that World Series, I had some pretty major surgery at hospitals for special surgery in New York City. And I shared a room with a Arizona Diamondbacks fan from Arizona coming across the country to get surgery. So who was wearing his Diamondbacks shirt when I got wheeled in. So I can't say that thrilled me, but yeah, I think those are the two things I'm most fascinated by. I think the first two episodes were good. I have very high expectations for the rest of the series. I think Randy Wilkins has done a fantastic job so far. So I think all of it's fantastic, but I think those are the two things I'm most interested in.
And you have to do that stuff for the non-Yankee fans, right? You can't not make episode 2 about the story of not just Derek Jeter, but that team. You have to introduce the characters that are going to be with us for kind of the rest of this run. And you just gotta do the high points, right? You got to see Jordan. Yeah, in Jordan's documentary, you got to see his first win. But we're all excited for the moment he decides to go play minor league baseball. I think that's the equivalent here with Jeter. He loses. What happens when Derek Jeter loses? Right. This crazy competitor that we all know, who by 2000 has won 4 out of 5 World Series in his first 5 years. What happens when that guy loses in 2001 and 2003? And then gets his heart broken in 2004.
That's the one I want to talk about is 2004. You hear all the stories of the Yankees about that 95 season and the loss against the Seattle Mariners and how that was so upsetting and how that was the hardest plane ride back. And they knew an era was ending, Buck was going to go, Mattingly was going to go and all that kind of stuff. But how badly that loss hurt. I would have to imagine that losing to the Red Sox after being up 3-0 and losing the curse of the Bambino, something that, you have to think that the players felt like that's something on our side. As an aside, I think the Astros right now feel like we can beat the Yankees whenever we want, just like the Yankees feel they can beat the Twins whenever they want. And I don't really believe in momentum, but I believe there is something to that. And I believe there's something to that on the team that keeps losing, saying like, we can't win because we have this giant burden and there's always something that's going to go wrong. And I think we've all been in games and situations where you're just waiting for Murphy's Law to kick in and for something bad to happen. So what I want to know is how badly that 2004 Yankee squad felt after blowing it and blowing the curse of the Bambino and changing really the dynamics forever between the Yankees and the Red Sox. I think that'll be interesting.
And there's a little bit of chaos in those teams, which is interesting in a lot of ways. I mean, this is a team that added Johnny Damon. That's interesting, right? Added a player from their chief rival. There's some characters that weren't so successful in those teams. Gary Sheffield was traded after 2 years. Kevin Brown kind of disappointed the team after punching a wall in the middle of 2004. I'm curious to see this. I mean, there's some guys here who I'd like to hear from. I'd love to hear from Giambi. I'd love to hear from Hideki Matsui. Those are guys who, I have a sense of some of their personalities, but not really, right? I mean, they're not as well covered as some of the other players on this team. And then, what happens when Joe Torre gets fired? I want to know that, right? I mean, how does he feel when you lose this guy who was a father figure to him, in the major leagues for so long, and you replace him with a former teammate in Joe Girardi, and Derek Jeter's in a very different place in his life. So there's lots of drama. Like I love the triumph. I mentioned this on the podcast. This documentary is harder for Wilkins in a lot of ways compared to the Jordan documentary, because the Jordan documentary, things happen at the right time. That is, there's a slow buildup. Jordan is a player. He has been on the Bulls for a while, but they're not that great. But he's still the best player in the world. And eventually they have the three-peat. And then drama happens. He leaves baseball. His father dies. He goes to play minor league baseball. What the heck is going on there? He's the best player in the world. And then he comes back. He has the other three-peat. There's this question of whether or not the Bulls are going to be broken up. That's drama, right? That is paced perfectly for a sports movie. And Derek Jeter, everything good that happens to him, other than the 2009 World Series and the last hit he has in Yankee Stadium, happens in the first 5 years he's in the majors. It's a different pacing. Now, you can kind of see the way they've paced out these episodes that, we're going to spend another episode on the Dynasty. Then we're going to spend an episode in 2001 and 2003 and all that. the low points I think are much more interesting than the high points for Jeter, which is unlike Jordan. I mean, the Jordan documentary came out when there were no sports on because of the pandemic. I was fist pumping. I hate basketball, and I was ready. I was going. I'm like, let's go. I was cheering for the Bulls during this time, and I just don't think this documentary can be like that. It's got to be about the person, Derek Jeter, which is just I think the most interesting thing.
Awesome stuff. Hey, let's just do a quick rundown. We only have a couple of minutes here. I'm going to change the banner here to a different title. Now, as a Yankee fan, I was the Yankee fan era when the Yankees already just had gotten Catfish Hunter. They got Reggie. They got Goose. They got Winfield. They got Ricky Henderson. The Yankees always got the big star. Even in recent years, the 2000s, they went out and they got Giambi. They went out and they got Matsui. They went out and they got Mike Messina. Supposedly Juan Soto is available. We don't have time to dig deep. This could be a topic next Monday. Maybe if he is a Yankee or maybe if he's another team. But if I'm the Yankees, my goodness, I'm going to move heaven and earth. I'm not going to give up the entire farm, but I am going to move heaven and earth, and I'm going to bring this guy to the Bronx. Do you guys disagree? Do you not want Juan Soto on the Yankees? Let's hear it.
I've been talking a lot, Andy. You go first.
Yeah, okay. I want Juan Soto with the following condition. If it means that we're also if we're going to spend the kind of money in prospect capital and actual money that it's going to cost to get Juan Soto and keep him around for a while, I also want the Yankees to open their checkbook and re-sign Aaron Judge. I either want both or I don't want Soto. Because if you go get Soto and then you shun Aaron Judge, who has done nothing other than be one of the 5 best players in the league on a rate basis over his Yankee career, I don't want him. I'm willing to give up a significant sum in terms of prospects and possibly even a major leaguer to go get Juan Soto because I think he is that good a hitter. I don't think he's a good defensive outfielder, but I only do it if you can keep Judge because I think Judge deserves to be a Yankee and I think he's going to age relatively gracefully.
All right, so let me just ask you this question then. I'm going to push back just a little bit. I wrote a thing about this last week. Andy, what if the Yankees do the right thing by you and by the fans and say, you know what, let's pretend they get Juan Soto. So you're saying you want him and Judge. Does it feel differently or do you feel differently if the Yankees get Soto? They give him a big contract. They say, we're going to give you $500 million over 15 years, $33 million a year so that we can keep you forever. You'll be the next great Yankee superstar. Then they turn around and they offer Aaron Judge, and I'm just going to make something ridiculous, $400 million over 10 years, $40 million a year for 10 years. He's going to out-earn Juan Soto on a year-to-year basis, and I think that would be an extremely generous contract. And let's say that Aaron Judge, for whatever reason, whether he really wants to play for the Giants or another team offers him more money or something, still isn't a Yankee. Are the Yankees to blame if they make a ginormous offer and Judge just says, I want to go elsewhere?
Not at all. No.
Okay.
If the Yankees actually put their best foot forward, then and Judge leaves, then that's on Judge. The Yankees at least did the right thing.
Oh, good. All right, I think we're in agreement.
Juan Soto is better than Aaron Judge. Aaron Judge is great this year. He's 30. Juan Soto is 23. You can sign Juan Soto to a 12-year contract, and for most of that contract, he's younger than Aaron Judge is today.
Keep in mind that Juan Soto's defense mitigates his value, and it's not going to get better.
So I've seen different numbers for Juan Soto. His year-to-year defense is pretty erratic. I think there's clearly like an effort thing going on, especially early in the season after the Nationals trade everybody. He kind of stopped running. Look, Juan Soto, if he's gonna have 1,000 OPS, which he could have on average for the next 10 years, I don't care about his defense. He could play a bad shortstop for all I care. Right? Like he's maybe the best young hitter ever. He's other than maybe Mike Trout. No one in the game right now can really claim that kind of consistency, and he could get better. He is not old.
He's 23.
Think about Giancarlo Stanton out in the outfield right now. He's awful, but Stanton hits enough that we're like, whatever, right? And Stanton is not even close to Juan Soto. It's not even the same ballpark as Juan Soto in terms of overall hitting ability. Soto's a lefty. And again, he's young. And so you think about the current Yankee players. You got a lot of guys in their 30s. So you signed, let's say you sign Aaron Judge. You have Garrett Cole. You have Juan Soto. You sign it Juan Soto. All of a sudden, you're talking about a player who is going to be in his prime, even as all those guys are aging. He can be the guy to carry that team as his contract is starting to look a little bit worse. And in the short term, I mean, the Yankees are just much better. The Yankees could not find a better hitter to add to their playoff team than Juan Soto right now. And I think, when you think about price for Juan Soto, think about giving up someone like Jason Dominguez. And let's say Jason Dominguez is as good as we think he is. He's still not as good as Juan Soto.
Well,
and Juan Soto is not that much older than him. He's 4 years older than Jason Dominguez. Right? That's nuts. That is absolutely nuts. Anthony Volpe, I think he's 2 years older than Volpe.
Mm-hmm.
Like what the like he is incredible. And so I say, look, I still need a shortstop. I still need one of Peraza and Volpe. Probably need some AAA pitchers. And besides that, I'll give up anything for him.
And I think it's time for the Yankees to go out and make that big, giant move. Hey, gentlemen, you know what? We went over an hour. I think the production went rather well. I'm going to now drop us down and put up the banner and play some exit music if we can do all that. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Start Spreading the News podcast. We're here every single Monday night on the Northeast Streaming Sports Network at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you for watching, everybody. And let's see if we can't do this and really have a great closing music. Let's see. How about this? I wish I picked a better song. Anyway, have a great day, everyone.